What is up, fellow sickos? I am Death Valley coming at you with another 2024-2025 NBA season look ahead. We're on to the New Orleans Pelicans, which means I get to speak with Shamit Dua from the In the Know podcast, as well as the Substack. You can find the links to those both in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Go over, subscribe, support him. Going to get into all things Pelicans. Super excited to talk about all these teams, but the Pelicans are just feels like there's a lot of different pivot points that this team is facing right now. So they're particularly intriguing to me. Very quickly, if you're new around these parts, subscribe. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, support the show. Ratings and reviews on Apple will help us move up the charts. 5 stars only. Leave some comments. Those are great. Comment and like our videos on YouTube. That also helps us grow. If you've done all those things, tell people about us. Consider if you really want to support the show so I can keep Grant rolling in name brand workout socks. Purchase our merch. Wearing For the Sicko sweat hoodie right here. There's a nice design on the back of it. We have some that are on the front. The link to our stores in the podcast and YouTube description as well. We appreciate all your support and anything you do to help us continue to grow. We appreciate that as well. But that's enough out of me. Let's go talk to Shamit Dua from In Know. Shamit, welcome back. This is the third time you're back for year 3 of the Pelicans Look Ahead with us. I very much appreciate you hopping back on with me. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. We're going for a three-peat here. I'm excited. This is one of my favorite times of the year because 1, I get to be on this show. 2, it means the seasons are right around the corner. So it's that time.
It seems close and yet so far away at the same time. I don't know how to describe it right now. The Pelicans, though, feels like they're just approaching like 80 different pivot points, but I have to just ask a general question about last season. What is just kind of like your biggest takeaway from what unfolded with the team?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from the team is the Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram partnership is not one that should continue forward. I think they've had 5 years to work it out, and last year was the most amount of games they played together. And I feel like you have a question here, so I'm gonna let you ask the question. But I think that was my biggest takeaway is that partnership. It's time to move on.
Yeah, we're going to start off spicy here. And so the question I've been asking is I dictate too much of these podcasts. So I've been asking people, what is their biggest storyline that they're monitoring into next season? I do pride myself on knowing, like, I kind of know what they're going to pick. The Pelicans have like 90 different things to choose from. And so what is your biggest storyline as we're sitting here basically at the beginning of September that you'll be monitoring with this team?
Yeah, look, so just continuing right off that one, is Brandon Ingram going to get traded, and when is that going to happen? I think, they would have liked to have done it around the draft or around when free agency first started. I don't think they necessarily read the market correctly, or I guess I don't even know if that's fair to say, is because I feel like they anticipated there'd be suitors, and I think that's a reasonable anticipation to have. And it just turns out that like no one was interested. And now they're here, and it's September basically. There's a chance maybe Utah wakes up in 2 weeks from now and they're like, you know what, we're not going to tank. We have Lowry Markin and Will Hardy, and we're just going to go for it, and maybe they get a deal done. But I would say that chance is very slim. So what you're looking at is Brandon going into the season and without an extension. And at what point is some team going to come around and be like, hey, like, let's move in on Brandon, like the Indiana Pacers did with Pascal Siakam in the middle of the year. So it's not stuff that hasn't happened before, but it's like, who is going to be the team? What's that deal going to look like? And there's other stuff around that deal that needs to happen, particularly from a financial standpoint, just where the Pelicans are at with their finances. So it's just like, man, now you have a pretty fine needle to thread, and it's kind of like you're running out of time to do it.
What is, like, do you have any theories as to why I understand Brandon can be a difficult player to fit into the larger context of a team. He's still a good player and he's not old. Like, what do you make of just the tepid trade market? Is this more about like teams still trying to really wrap their head around the new CBA? Does it speak to the level of not desperation, but like, okay, he's headed into his final year. Now we're going to have to pay him. And so that's on their mind. Is it just, well, the Pelicans might be asking for too much and they have leverage in negotiations with him, but maybe not a ton of leverage in trade negotiations? It's such a bizarre dynamic when looking at his trade value specifically.
For sure. I think it is almost entirely related to his contract demands. From my understanding, him and his agent are seeking the maximum 4-year extension that he's eligible for. That put him around $208 million in new money which is a lot of money.
That's a lot of
It's a
money.
lot of money. It's 30% of the cap. And so that's where the Pelicans have a pause. That's where I think a lot of teams have paused. So it's like, if we're going to spend assets to trade for this guy, and then we got to pay him like a top 15 player. Last year, there was 14 players in the league that made 30% or above the salary cap. So you're going to pay him like a top 15 player. The return has to be a lot more than what Brandon's provided on the basketball court. He's a very good player. He's had availability issues. He's played somewhere around like 45, 50, and then like 60-ish games in the last 3 seasons. So he's missed, 20 plus games each of the last 3 seasons. And then as a player, I think he's topped out. He hasn't quite broken into that absolutely surefire all-star or all NBA range yet. He's kind of had spurts where he's looked like that guy, and certainly stretches where he's looked like that guy. But teams are just like, man, I don't know. That's not a sure thing. So how can we commit money to that?
So if they're going to go into the season with him, I guess the one like easy question is there's a chance that this just becomes a major distraction that's hanging over the team, right? Because it's constantly being speculated about and talked about and reported on.
I am really worried about that because the other component of this is the pending Trey Murphy extension. So Trey Murphy is finished 3 years of play. He's eligible for the rookie extension. My understanding is something's going to get done there before the season starts. I think both sides have a good working relationship, but let's say something gets done, I think it's going to be a lot of money. So let's say Trey Murphy's making somewhere in the $30 million range per year, or in the high 20s, but it's still a large amount of money. And then you have Brandon Ingram, who's an expiring and doesn't have a deal done. Does he feel some type of way that they prioritize Trey, right? Mm-hmm. And then what happens if Willie Green decides one game, hey, Brandon's not having a great game, we're going to close this one out with Trey, or we're going to just some of these decisions without that contract in hand make me a little bit nervous. And then I'm also a little bit nervous how Brandon's going to approach it personally. How is he going to play knowing there's a contract on the line? If he feels jilted that he wasn't given a max, is he going to go out there and prove he's a max player? And what does that look like? Does that mean he's just taking a lot of shots and not necessarily playing within the system? I don't think any of these things are impossibilities. And I just think you've got to have a healthy fear of things going wrong. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Now, you've already said that you're kind of just out on the fit with Zion, and I think Dejounte Murray coming in super complicates that. But like, if there's a way for Brandon Ingram to fit in the larger context of the team, what does that look like? Is it kind of winding back the clock to that? When you look at his shot profile first season in New Orleans, night and day, basically, compared to what it like just is that what it looks like to him, like that type of like offensive role, or is there other things that you're monitoring there? Like, what is the pathway? Because he sounds like he's going to be on this team on opening night. And so, like, what is the best way for him to actually optimize himself or help optimize this team?
100%. It's the shot profile. With Dejounte Murray coming in, Brandon's going to be off the ball a lot more than he's used to being. There's going to be touches split between him, Dejounte, Zion, all these guys who like playing on the ball. Somebody's going to have to get those threes up. Now, Dejounte hasn't been shy in getting those threes off, but he took a fair amount of off the dribble threes as well. I don't know if BI is comfortable taking off the dribble threes. And if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he might not even have the opportunity to take a lot of off the dribble threes. There's going to be a lot of kickouts. Zion's going to get to the paint, kick out. DeJounte's going to get to the paint, kick out. They're going to play up tempo and transition. He's going to have to take those threes. Defensively, he's trended upwards since, the Alvin Gentry and Stan Van Gundy years, every single year. Under Willie Green, I think Brandon's been solid, and he's had moments of good defense, where I think previously he could have been called a liability. Now I think he holds his own and can be disruptive. He's going to have to maintain that level of defensive intensity. And I'm just a little bit concerned where, okay, you're going to be a player that has to get threes up, and then you're going to have to play defense, and then you're going to have to rebound, and then you're going to have to facilitate. You're going to be super Nick Batum, which is a very, very good player.
Right.
But is that the player he wants to be? Is that the player that he thinks is going to get a max? Ironically, that player would get a ton of money. I mean, we just saw OG Anunoby get a monster
Nick
deal.
Batum got got 9 figures back when it was a big deal to get 9
Right.
figures.
Exactly. Well, he actually got, I think, a 25% max. He didn't get the 30, but he got 25% max that Batum did. But yeah, OG Anunoby got a monster deal, and Brandon. I don't think it's a stretch to say by any means that Brandon's a far better offensive player than Anunoby, just in terms of capability. So, can you become this versatile glue guy, and does that go against your own self-image, right? I think that's kind of the battle here. It's like, we need you to plug in these holes, but he sees himself as the go-to person, like like a Carmelo.
So if I had to force you to make a prediction on how this ends, whether it's he gets traded before the season, mid-season, we take this to free agency, maybe we see an extension, maybe we see him resign. It's August the 31st. And this is probably going to go up like very soon because this is a team that could blow up like everything that we talk about. If you had to predict how this ends, what would you go with?
I believe he would get traded mid-season, closer to the trade deadline. I think the Pelicans would kick tires around Jared Allen once again. There's going to be 5 days of trade eligibility there for Allen, who signed his extension earlier this summer. If that fit is going south for Cleveland, Pelicans will 100% be knocking on that door. Barring that, I think the Pelicans would accept just any kind of general, hey, let's just get some salary back that's maybe expiring, maybe a weak pick, or maybe some weirdly interesting young prospect. Well, I'm looking at Houston, for example, right? What are they going to do with Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun? And if we get to the deadline and Houston's just out of this play-in chase and not even like in play-in contention, are they willing to do Jalen Green, maybe one of those future picks, and something, some weird salary that they got? It's going to be an unappetizing trade. The Pacers got 3 picks,
first round picks,
picks, and then what was it? They got three picks. That's what it was.
Yeah, it was. There's the 20. I guess the Indies 2026 pick is somewhat intriguing, but like if they have Siakam and Halliburton and Nembhard there, I don't know why. Like they're going to be good. So
yeah, sorry, yeah, it was I keep saying the Pacers got, but the Raptors did, and they got the Bruce Brown contract, and that was essentially it. So who's going to be like the Bruce Brown thing that comes back in this deal? That's kind of like what I'm looking at, like the guy that's playable salary that you're hoping to flip later, for something. I don't know, and I think if that deal doesn't net a center for them, I could see the Pelicans taking if there's any draft capital that comes from that, or taking some of their own draft capital and attaching it to CJ and going after a center with that regard. I'm looking at Nick Claxton in Brooklyn, who I think the Nets are going to be open for business for any of their players at this point, as long as you're willing to meet their price.
Yeah, he would be so good on this team. He probably likes to like do stuff with the ball a little too much than what they're looking for, but he is so good. I love Nick Claxton. Big Nick Claxton fan over here. So Dejounte Murray was actually traded, and it was to the New Orleans Pelicans. Just right off, like what was your thoughts on that trade?
I'm a big fan of it. I think I was campaigning for them to trade for Murray as soon as it became apparent that he was going to be on the trade market back in like January or February, prior to the trade deadline. And, I wrote this article on the Substack that they should go after Dejounte Murray, and it's very likely that they would be able to get him without putting Brandon in the deal, and that would free them up to move Brandon to go complete the rest of their roster. And I thought conceptually that was very sound, and they were able to do it with Dyson, who I love. I love Dyson. I don't know if he would have reached his potential on this version of the Pelicans. Larry Nance, expiring salary, and 2, I would say, picks. I don't think they were fantastic picks that the Pelicans sent out. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I thought, wow, home run deal.
Especially because of Murray's own deal, by the way.
Yeah, Murray's like 20% of the salary cap, 21% of the salary cap. Yeah, there was a little bit of a bump that he got because of his trade kicker, the largest in history, but it's really not that big of a deal. And I thought my argument was that Murray and Brandon, statistically almost identical players, right? In terms of like raw production, like they were like last year, it was like 22, like 6-6. Like both of them were like roughly at that like amount. And then I thought the upside with Murray was a little bit greater because of his fit with Zion. I don't think Brandon and Zion can be involved in actions together because Brandon is not the greatest advantage creator. And so if you do like screen and rolls with Brandon as the ball handler, he's not going to be able to turn the corner. And it's an easy switch because they're kind of like size players. Where I think Dejounte, he's a lot quicker in his decisions. And he gets downhill like quicker. He doesn't live at the rim or anything. That's still like something he needs to improve because he likes to operate in the mid-range area as well. But I think that's a harder switch. Murray was a really, really good isolation player too last year. So I think just being able to put Murray and Zion in action together. So if I'm getting Brandon, but at 20% of the salary cap and maybe like a 3% or 5% better fit, yeah, that's a great player. Let me take that and then turn Brandon into something else. Hopefully a center. That last bit they haven't been able to do. It's that last bit they haven't been able to do yet.
It seems like they were banking on it based off what the roster looks like currently.
Yeah.
That was actually one of my questions, though, with Murray, is that so you do think that it will invite more creative use of Zion away from the ball, where it feels like when he doesn't have the ball, it's either he's just like kind of coming up to go get it, or if he's off the ball completely, he doesn't feel like he's doing much a lot of the time when you're watching him.
Yeah, I think so. And not only that, and just not having a center, they're going to have to be creative. I think they're gonna run a lot of small ball lineups. I think internally right now they're split on whether they should just start out the gate small as opposed to starting a token center for the first 7 minutes of the first quarter and the first 7 minutes of the third quarter and never seeing another center again. That's kind of what they did with JV this past year. The poor JV, they wouldn't even start him out of half some of these games, and it's like, okay, you already committed to that, and then the person you were replacing JV was Larry Nance. Again, solid player, but he was at best the 200th best player in the league, maybe 250th. So it's like, in this case, you have Daniel Tice, who's like in that range, 250, 300, or you can just start your best 5 players who are all top 100 players. I feel like I am of the mindset that they should just start their best 5 players, that having a nominal center who's not very good isn't really going to help you just because they can play center. And Daniel Tice is 6'8", so it's like not even he's a real deal center. Yeah.
Looking at if Ingram is still on this team, I think in theory Ingram will have to be the one that should need to adapt more. But I'm just wondering, because Murray, as we saw in Atlanta, like he is someone who is more comfortable and took more of those catch and shoot threes. Is it going to be end up him maybe that's adapted? Like when you're looking at the 3 of these stars together, so long as they're playing together, who winds up making or is going to need to make the most adaptations to ensure this thing works while it's together?
That's a great question. Historically, the way that the politics of this team have been set up, like Zion's been the one like, I'll take a backseat, right? That can't happen anymore. So the first thing that needs to happen is everybody needs to be on the same page as Zion's team. And I think Murray understands that. I think he said something to that effect in his introductory press conference where he said something like, that's our superstar. So I think there's an understanding there. Secondly, Murray will have to adapt just because Brandon is also a good player, and you're going to have to do things that gets your good player going. You can't just, like, as much as I want him to be this perfect role player, like, you're going to have to make him comfortable in some ways in order to optimize everything that's going on. So Murray is going to have to continue to take those threes. It's actually a contract incentive of his to make 101 or 103, I forget. And he
such a specific number. I love it.
Yeah. He made 200 and something last year. It was over 200.
There was a point, I think it was like before the All-Star break or something, he was shooting the hell out of off the dribble threes. It wasn't just like he finished like 40% on catch and shoots, and that number on pull-ups ended up dipping, but he was shooting the lights out on unassisted threes at one point. It was wild.
Yeah. So he made over 200 last year. He needs to continue to take around 7 to 8. And I'm okay with that being the shot that he takes. I think some of these guys like Luka and Ant, who are just not the world's best shooters, but they take a lot of threes. They have nights where that 3 ball is falling and they're just unguardable. Like, you just can't do anything with them. And it makes it warps the defensive coverage. It makes you I don't know, it just changes how teams guard you. And I think Murray needs to continue to do that. I'm a big believer in lead guards putting shots up from deep. But he's going to have a lot of opportunities off the catch too. Brandon is a fantastic 3-point generator himself. He gets to the teeth of the defense and kicks it out. He's a good playmaker. Zion, of course, we know that he was 9th in the league in 3-point assists last year. 10th was Murray, actually. And so they're going to have opportunities to take these shots, and they absolutely need to. And kind of circling back to Brandon, he's going to need to as well. He only made about 80 or so. He made less than Herb Jones. So it's like, who would have thought that,
All things are possible through Herb Jones, so it's nothing surprising me about him anymore. Is there like a way they're all going to start? So it's like if you gave Ingram the quick hook and kind of staggered them that way, would that be a way to maybe alleviate like some of the awkwardness to where he's going to get more time independent of Murray at the least, but maybe independent of both Zion and Murray and help run those units? Is that something that you expect them to try, that they should try, that'll be like a heavy like staple of what they're doing?
Well, they absolutely, to answer your question, yes, because they staggered Zion and Brandon a lot last year, because I think they quickly put together that starting unit that they would put out just didn't function correctly, and then they'd get into their
stick with it for some reason. I don't understand it necessarily.
I don't understand that either. And then they would do their stagger units, and their stagger units would destroy. It didn't matter like who was, like the Brandon units were very good, the Zion units were very good too. So it was just like, I think they will probably continue to do that and then kind of figure out who Murray works best with. And I assume that they would experiment more with the Zion aspect of it first, because it certainly seems like those two are more of the players that are going to be here long term or in the near future than BI. But, you never know. I do think staggering will be a big part of their strategy, though.
You mentioned Trey Murphy and that you would just start the 5 best players right out of the gate. Do you, one, trust them to do that? But 2, if they're not, if they say, hey, we need to put Daniel Tice in the starting lineup or whatever, does that diminish the likelihood that Trey Murphy starts, or does it diminish the likelihood that I'm just assuming like CJ McCollum will come off the bench, won't start?
So if they start Daniel Tice, 2 of Herb Jones, CJ McCollum, or Trey Murphy come off the bench. 2 of those 3. I think that's a ridiculous proposition, because that's 3 very, very good players. And if 2 of them are coming off the bench, something is going wrong. And I want to do everything I can to maximize the minutes like 2 of those 3s play, right? The player I would bring off the bench is CJ McCollum in any of those scenarios. I think that is the one I would absolutely do, because I would like the Pelicans to be big at the perimeter positions as much as possible, knowing that they're going to be weak at the center spot. Even with Tice, I would like them to be big at the perimeter positions.
Okay.
I also just think that CJ's efficacy off the bench in this construction with Murray is going to be a lot higher, because there's just, again, the lack of touches. And if you're just relegating CJ to be a spot up, an attack closeout guy, Trey can do that just as well. And he's a better defender and he's a better rebounder. And Trey can finish above the rim. So it's just one of those things where it's like off the bench, CJ can maybe play that Jamal Crawford role, get some of his own stuff going, and still get a lot enough catch and shoots off of whichever stagger guy that he's playing off of. But yeah, I mean, my whole thing comes down to, if you're bringing 2 guys off the bench that are very good players, they're going to play max 26, 27 minutes a game. And that's just not enough minutes for a Trey Murphy or a Herb Jones and even a CJ McCollum. But like, I think making it so only one person suffers that fate instead of 2 is the way to go.
So it does seem like then, based off what you're saying, that if the roster stays largely the same, or let's just say Brandon Ingram is still on this team on opening night, and so is CJ McCollum, that this roster construction is going to then result in more Zion at the 5.
Well, yes and no. I think they will play as small, and that doesn't necessarily mean Zion's guarding the 5-man. I think you'll see, one, you're going to see those units are going to switch everything. So like who guards the 5 really blurs. You don't really know who's guarding the 5 if they're switching all the screens. 2, I think there's going to be matchups where they do put Herb on the 5 or they put a Brandon on the 5.
Can they get away with Ingram? Like Herb, of course, but like, can Ingram do that in like a I'll call it a steady volume.
Yeah, so Ingram can do it in certain matchups. They experimented with it a little bit last year. They put him up against Allen, and he held up. He did just fine. And I think there's more of the rim running type centers that they would do it on and allow Zion to roam. Zion's actually quite a good low man defender. He likes to hunt some of these blocks and steals. So they like his defensive playmaking off the ball. Same thing with Herb Jones. It's like, if he's not at the point of attack, then you kind of want him in the lanes creating havoc. So it's the advantage of just putting Ingram on some of these slimmer centers that are really offensive non-threats. Because if you're playing against like the Mavs, then you want Gafford to be the one eating up all the possessions and not Luka eating up all the possessions. So you kind of want to take teams out of their rhythm of how they're playing, and they think that they have a mismatch with an Ingram or somebody, and really it's Herb Jones that's waiting for you to try to like do something, and he's just going to take the ball from you.
So where are you at? We haven't really talked about Zion much yet. Where are you kind of at with the big fella? And like, what did you make? I think it was like what he did last year. Like, I don't know, quarter of the way through the season after the midseason tournament, whatever. Just felt like a switch flipped defensively for him. So like, what was kind of the biggest difference you noticed in his performance last year?
It's almost like he had two different seasons within one season. So I think for the first half of the season, he was a pretty disappointing player. I don't think he was playing at a top 50 level. He was having his least efficient year. He was obviously not playing great defense, and you saw it culminate at the in-season tournament in Vegas against the Lakers, and he just looked lethargic, and they got embarrassed pretty badly. And then it started trending the other direction into where when he started peaking in March and April. It looked like, oh my God, the destroyer of worlds is here. Like this guy is wanting defensive assignments. He wants to guard Kawhi. He wants to guard LeBron. He's, he's pinning KD stuff off the backboard. So it's just like, this was a completely different player. I'm optimistic that player is going to be the one that walks through the door on opening night. Just based off of all of the reports around him. And it just seems like he's changed his lifestyle in a meaningful way. He certainly looks physically like he's in great shape this summer with all the pictures that have come out. We've been fooled by the pictures before. So it's one of those things like, I got to see it like in person. I got to see it in a game, but it could be worse. We've also seen the bad social media with regards to Zion. So like right now it's a completely different summer than last summer, and the press has been nothing but positive. And I'm excited to see what, his stepdad said they want to get him down to 271, and he's currently at 282, and at Duke, he was listed at 285. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. I think he could be a very, very different player if he's not having to play his way into shape for the first 3-4 months of the season.
And you would hope that, I guess, being lighter, like at least makes it less likely he's going to suffer just some of these lower body injuries, because it's just such a bummer. I mean, obviously the way he was playing, but just like not being able to see this guy in all these high stakes games really sucks, because he's so good when he's operating at his peak.
Yeah, I think, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know about like the likelihood of injury or not. I'm not going to speculate on it, but I do think that being lighter from a personal experience makes you far more explosive, and it just reduces your fatigue levels. And I think there is a link between fatigue and injury. So if you're just constantly tired or sore or out of, that kind of stuff, then I think there's tendencies to get out of shape. Or not out of shape, tendencies to get hurt in those conditions. So I'm more excited for his conditioning aspect of being lighter. I think it's easier to get in that elite conditioning that you need to be as an NBA player when you're carrying less weight, for sure.
Trey Murphy receives a lot of attention for shooting, the way he can go about his shooting and be deployed. He is a lot more than that. And I know that you're someone who's been like, I don't even want to say early on Murphy. You've been on top of Murphy from the beginning. What's something or stuff that he can do for this team that you think goes overlooked on sort of that macro scale?
For sure. They primarily use him as a spot-up guy and a spacer guy. And I think that's doing themselves a disservice, because he has more to offer. He is a guy in my opinion, that needs to be used like Lauri Markkanen is used in Utah. They need to leverage his athleticism, getting downhill without the ball, getting him in motion. He can finish over people, and he's done that multiple times. And you're not going to get that as often if it's just attacking closeouts. Sure, that's always going to be a part of his game, and I think the three ball is always going to be kind of the moneymaker. But you can leverage the threat of his shooting, A, as a screener, but B, just kind of like becoming a roll man. We talked about like the like size switch between Brandon and Zion. One thing I think they can do with Trey is, because of how they use him, he ends up taking on the worst defender of the opponent usually. So it's usually a small guard that's kind of hidden on him in the corner. And if you start using him as a screener with Zion, good luck, right? Because you can't really switch that to
Right.
now you can mix in rolls to the rim, because I think Trey can finish above the rim. And so it's like, oh, did you just invent a lob threat for Zion? Like, yeah, he's right there. Try it. Two, that pick and pop is going to generate an easy look every single time. So I think you can simplify the game and get him more touches. And I think there's other things that you can do just off the ball, where using his shooting gravity to like spring other people open and just kind of create space on the weak side of the court. So I do think there's a lot of creativity that they need to bring this season, and I'm optimistic they will.
I don't know if they have, like, just based off the hierarchy politics here, it also feels like if Zion was screening for him, that's like a capability that Trey Murphy would have, just based off some of the passes he's made on drives. But like, he's not a high turnover guy. We've seen him navigate some tight spots in the half court when he is on the ball. Sometimes it just doesn't happen a ton. So I would love to see something like that. But also the reality of the situation is what you laid out feels far more likely, because it plugs and plays into how the Pelicans are already operating, whereas this feels like more of a wholesale shift, especially when you're adding Dejounte Murray and Brandon Ingram is still on this team.
Well, I think you're right. I think it's really easy for them to do. Like, let's say Zion gets the ball around the wing and Trey's, in the corner closest to him. Maybe Zion takes a dribble, breaks in the defense, and then Trey flies over for a handoff, and Zion goes for a handoff. Trey's probably going to have an open three there. But let's say the defender's really good and gets over that screen and smiles at handoff. Okay, well, Trey puts the ball on the floor. Now you just got a baked in pick and roll with Zion on the empty side, and Trey's shown that he can make those pocket passes, and now Zion's on the move going to the rim. So it's just like, yes, please give me more of your pick your poison with the rim king and the elite shooter. Like, just figure, like, that should be easy basketball.
Is there any, like, I don't even want to call it a weakness, but an area of development that you're still like kind of monitoring with him to see how it pans out?
With Trey?
Yeah.
Defensively and just activity on the boards. I think offense, we already know his floor as an offensive player, and I think that floor is you can plug him into any team and just be elite. I think what's going to tip him over to being one of these guys that get some of these OG Anunoby type deals later on in their career is how well he can hold up defensively across multiple positions. And I think in Virginia in college, he was a very, very good defender. And in the NBA, he's been not that great. And then was trending upwards last year, and to where he was like, okay, by the end of the year, he was also kind of like Zion, like, oh, you're blocking shots that I didn't see you block before. You're going after rebounds that I didn't see you do. And so I know he has it in him, just got to bring it out consistently. And that's where I'm really looking for a lot of strides.
I was having this discussion with Greg Wissinger from the King's Herald about Keegan Murray and his extension next year. Is Trey Murphy belong in the, like, will he be one of the ball litmus testers based off the reaction to what he gets in extension? Because you're throwing numbers out before. When you said in the 20s, I'm like, if they get Trey Murphy locked down in the 20s per year, that's going to be a steal.
It's going to be a steal. Look, I think his deal is going to be somewhere in the realm of 5 years, $150 to $170 million. So
that's Emmanuel Quickly money, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, that's quickly, I think, kind of set this market for some of those guys, unfortunately. And I think that was an insane deal for the Raptors to give there. I don't even know who they were bidding against, but that's how the league played out.
Yeah, the market this summer was just so bizarre. I ended up having such a bad feel for it, and we didn't see, there were no offer sheets given out this year, right? And wasn't last year we only had the Paul Reed offer sheet late in the summer. So I'm trying to think just off rip. Like, I don't know who are the Pacers bidding against for Obi Toppin? Like, why did he get above the middle?
Oh gosh, yeah. Look, I think some of the Pacers are another team where I just think that they had this kind of window with Halliburton, and now they've just locked up all of these guys to keep their same team. And I get it, you made the Eastern Conference Finals, so you feel good about it, but it's just like you need to be salary flexible in the worst way as some of these small market teams, and you need to be able to move off your current build and just restructure around your star. And I think that's one thing, for all Daryl Morey's works that like he was able to do repeatedly around James Harden was just kind of invent a new team. Mm-hmm. And that just because you stay flexible at the margins, committing 4 years to a 32-year-old small guard in TJ McConnell when you just paid Nembhard, it's just like, why would you do that? And it's just 4 years. He's 32 years old. He's going to be 36 by the end of the deal. And you're like, oh, well, it's not that much money. It's like, cool. Tyrese Halliburton got the All-NBA bonus. So that's 5% more that you weren't accounted for. Pascal Siakam's around 30% of the cap. So together they're making 60%. And then now you're just handing out deals to role players. And granted, he was great in the playoffs, but it's just like, man, I don't know. I would not have done that.
I actually probably have a bigger problem with the Obi Toppin of it all than I do.
Yeah, I mean, same concept.
Herb Jones last year, shooting receives a ton of attention. Anecdotally and somewhat statistically, when you dig into it, did feel like he was doing like more offensive initiation. Is that going to fall by the wayside now, looking at the construct of this team? And is there maybe room to kind of use him more as like, well, look at Herb Jones, like kind of operating out of the short roll, because we did see I remember at least seeing a couple possessions where it looked like he was doing that. So like, how can he be like deployed in continued creative ways offensively? Because he was just so much more than his shooting improvement last year.
Yeah. Same thing with Trey. Just get these guys involved in the action a lot more, get them screening off ball, on the ball, and again, Herb is athletic enough to where you get him going downhill, he's going to finish, and he's going to finish well, or he's going to get to the free throw line. So run a pick and roll, especially if you're doing some of these small ball units. Like if Zion has the ball in his hands and you got BI spotting up and Dejounte spotting up and Trey spotting up, like, yeah, like run a screen and roll with Herb. It's going to be great. You're going to have a great time. Trust me.
Entertaining too to watch stuff like that. So
they're gonna have to.
They get built to do that. I hope that becomes like just staple.
That's what I think. It's like, look, you're not gonna win playing traditionally because the traditional guy you're playing is just not a good player, and so you're trying to play against these other teams who have better players at that position. And in the West, elite players at that position, elite bigs in the West, man. And so you got to do something that's different, and you have to hammer your strengths. And right now, unfortunately, your strengths are your wings. You have a lot of wings that are like-sized, and they're good offensively, and they can wreak havoc defensively. So just be big 1 through 4, and the 5 position you're going to see it upsize, but you're going to have a ton of offense there. So who cares?
When you look at the centers who are on their team, do you have any like overarching sentiment? Like I've talked myself into Carlo Matkovic, maybe we should get him some minutes. But when I'm looking at this and seeing like, I know Daniel Tice isn't super old. He seems older than he actually is, but probably because he's dealt with so many injuries. But like, I'm assuming Tice is the most important, like non-Zion, like big on this, like conventional big. And then do you see him like Matkovic or maybe me like getting an opportunity? I don't know what to make of it. And we're at the point of the offseason where I have talked myself into Carlo. Like, I feel like that dude could make like a little bit of an impact. Like he was able to do this and that in summer league. Looked like he was moving well defensively. So I just don't know where I land. It's such a curious roster. It makes sense, the stuff they're doing independent of the bigs, but to not have like a center that you trust just feels so weird to me.
I don't think they should give minutes to either Carlo or Misi or even JRE unless absolutely needed, right? Because like I'm just looking at the minute allocation, and if you're bringing some of these dudes off the bench that are not going to start, there's just no way you're going to be able to give them the requisite minutes unless you play a lot of small ball stuff. And so if you're playing a lot of small ball stuff, then you don't have room to give minutes to those other guys. And so it's either one of those guys getting 14 to 20 minutes a game as a starter, or one of those guys getting 14 to 20 minutes off the bench, and there's really no more minutes to give to anybody else, in my opinion. I just wouldn't even fool around with it. I mean, look, in the preseason, sure, whatever, figure out what you can do. Maybe if someone's blowing you away in camp, you find a way to get someone minutes. I just don't even know if I would spend time practicing that stuff. I would practice being small and just being the best possible small team. But hey, I'm not the coach.
So what is, you can kind of glean this from the names that are most mentioned with the Pelicans, which right now feel like Walker Kessler and still Jared Allen floating around out there. But what is like the single biggest thing the Pelicans need out of a 5?
Being a 5? No. That's a great question. I think they would want a guy that can finish above the rim, first and foremost. And then a guy that can rebound the ball at a high level, and 2 is mobile enough to play different schemes defensively. Now, you don't have to be able to switch 1 through 5 every single time, but you do have to be able to play at the level of the screen. You do have to be able to get out the shooters. You do have to be able to change it up. So I think just mobility and speed, first and foremost, are what they're looking for. And then offensively, I don't think they are married to the idea of getting a stretch 5 simply because it limits them so much in terms of the guys that are actually available. You want good players, so they think they can create spacing if they have a vertical threat. If they have a vertical threat with Zion, you build a wall, then you plant the guy behind the wall. Zion's just going to throw over that wall. Same thing with Murray. And so just offensively, don't be a 0 and be able to finish above the rim is what I would say.
Have you given thought to any names aside from Walker Kessler or Jared Allen that would be worth monitoring? And is this team, I guess they have like the trade exceptions that they could take someone into, and there's draft equity they could send out, but just based off, now we've gotten to the point because Dyson Daniels is gone, Larry Nance Jr. is gone. The outgoing salaries in a lot of these cases are just massive, or you're dealing, because you're not trading your core players of like Herb or Trey Murphy. So it's almost like they're only built, maybe it's not a blockbuster center coming in, but they're only built to make a blockbuster trade, and getting like a center, maybe like a mid-end center or a lower-end center will come back as part of that deal. But that's some of the issues I've run into with them, is that I don't know if there's just like, oh, they swung and hit a, like even getting Day'Ron Sharpe to the Pelicans, for instance, can be somewhat challenging, but they do have the trade exceptions they could take them into. So I guess there's that. But have you given thought to any names outside of the 2 that are mentioned the most?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Walker Kessler thing is interesting because the trade construction I do with Brandon is Kessler and Collins, because that gives him 2 looks at 2 different kind of centers, right? So it's just like, cool, you got the bouncy young guy that can also shoot threes, and then you got the traditional drop big who blocks shots. I love that because I'm like, you can go in any direction. You have 2 bigs, you feel good about them. The one that I keep coming back to is the CJ McCollum, DeAndre Ayton challenge trade. I think it's a festival of sadness that no one wants to be a part of. But I'm like, I think by February, someone can get desperate enough to be like, okay, if you're Portland, you just want to clear minutes for Klingon, and you just want Ayton out of there. And then if you're the Pels, they're roughly the same salary, so you just kind of make that happen. And they have the same amount of years left. So it's like CJ would be an expiring next year. Ayton would be an expiring next year. It won't prevent you from making any of the moves that you want to make. What would really need to happen is then Brandon needs to be traded for like a lot of like expiring money. That way, because you just can't have money coming back in a Brandon trade that's long term. You're going to be over the tax. But that one's a fun one. Obviously, we mentioned.
I'm going to tell you right now, I'm so out on Deion. I'd rather them take a flyer on Robert Williams III somehow. Like that's
the perfect Pelicans player. Play 35 games a year and be really good, but then just not be available.
Yeah, there you go.
Sounds like a good fit. Yeah, I don't know how they can get to it. The problem with like Robert Williams and Wendell Carter is there's no real way to get to their dollar figure, as you mentioned, like just the large salaries that the Pelicans have. So they'd have to get creative, get multiple teams involved. There's always there's always the Clint Capellas of the world that he's an expiring. Maybe they can work something out with Clint and the Hawks, but it's pretty dire, man. Like there's not a great selection of bigs.
Does Isaiah Stewart do it for you at all? Like there might be like trade deadline when restrictions lift. Maybe getting
Yeah, but again,
Fontecchio
it's
back
just
in
like
that
that's
deal.
just such a weird salary because he's like Isaiah Stewart's like at 16 mil a year. So it's just like
Get
cool.
Fontecchio back. We're at 23. Now we're cooking with something here. So
Yeah, I
that
mean, yeah, Trajan should love one of CJ or Brandon, right? It's great. Um, yeah, man, it's tough. To be honest, it's super tough to construct. I mean, Kessler, Collins, Allen, Claxton are like the main ones I look at. Anything else, like I think it could be anybody's guess. They really liked Edie in the draft, and they liked Klingon, of course. They liked the Behemoths. And unfortunately, we're not. They attempted to trade up for them, but I think it didn't pan out. Obviously,
uh what were they, sixth in defense last year, despite not having a five that you would call a top tier rim protector. I have two questions, one of which might just be stupid, but the first one's not. Just like for our listeners, like what goes into the Pelicans being so good or being able to be so good defensively without having that elite type of big man where a lot of the times you like even teams that like the Celtics, the way they defend, like they still have like one or two elite big men, depending on how you feel about Al Horford. What allows and obviously Zion's an elite big man, but what allows the Pelicans like to be so good defensively without that conventional type of defensive big man?
a few things. One, they sell out to prevent shots at the rim. So pack the paint style defense. We'll give up threes if we have to. They do. They give up a good number of threes. I think it's like top 5 in the league that they give up. But sell out to protect the rim, protect the paint. So we don't have a good rim protector. That's correct, but you're not going to get to the rim. We're just going to make it very difficult to do. Secondly, what they do is they generate a lot of turnovers. So Jose Alvarado, Herb Jones, Dyson Daniels, even Larry Nance, Najee Marshall, these people were always forcing steals. Zion too, when he started getting in shape, just a lot of guys that can generate turnovers. That helped them defensively. And lastly, they've been, I actually forgot where they finished at, but they've historically, over the last few years, they've been a decent rebounding team.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps them, is just kind of not giving up second chances. So they kind of clean up the low hanging fruit and recognize that, okay, we can't really protect the rim. Oh, and the last thing is they were the best team at defending the 3-point line.
No luck involved there though, right? That's just completely, it's all.
People go back and forth on that. I have certainly analytically, it's very, very difficult to prove or even find evidence that it's anything but luck. It's very difficult to, it's all variance. If you look at the data, it's like, cool, there's nothing we can do experimentally that like tells us that it's not variance. But that's with publicly available data and, measuring certain variables. I don't know if we have an accurate way to measure Herb Jones yet. So
we need a metric named after Herb Jones. We've got LeBron and Raptor. Where's
right?
Herb?
Yeah. It's just Herb Jones.
Well, this was my second question about it. So the turnover aspect, I think with now Murray in his current role, like being able to play with Herb Jones, even this version of Ingram or what we think Trey Murphy could be, I feel like he can do stuff like that and he'll look a lot better defensively in New Orleans. The rebounding aspect, I'm wondering if there's a concern there about compromising their defense because you lost Valanciunas, but you also lost Najee Marshall, who's a pretty good positional rebounder. So is there any level of concern there about that impacting their defense in the sense of being able to end possessions? Just because, as you mentioned, they are good at preventing those second chance opportunities.
Big time. JV was a monster. Just
you look at the on-off rebounding splits with him are fucking wild.
Yeah, JV was a monster. So there's a huge concern for me. They're going to have to get creative. They're going to have to gang rebound. Dejounte's going to have to be a person that was closer to the Spurs level where he was at like around 8 or 9 a game, as opposed to, around 6 that he's been with the Hawks. So same thing with Zion, same thing with Brandon, all of those guys. It's going to be a collective effort to get those, but it might just end up being a thing where like OKC was like 28th or 29th in defensive rebounding, but they were so good at every other aspect of defense. The one thing the Pelicans don't have that OKC had was an incredible rim protector like Chet. But they're going to have to do a lot of what OKC did, is like be great offensively. So you're playing a lot more half court defense than you are transition defense. And that helps you a lot. And then, generate a shit ton of turnovers and just swarm teams by being faster than them.
It was like either the second half of the year or the latter third of the year, like OKC's wings and guards were like selling out to just box out people so that their bigs could grab rebounds, and their defensive rebounding rate shot through the roof during that span. So you could also try and do something like that since you have so many of those wing types. Jordan Hawkins, where does he fit into the vision of this team?
I'm not sure that he does, to be honest. I wasn't the biggest fan of that pick in general. Not a fan of drafting specialists, and that's what I pegged Jordan as. He's going to have to be a player that hits a shot at an elite level at a high volume. Because if he doesn't, then he's not going to be able to provide value to the Pelicans because he doesn't yet contribute anywhere else on the court. He's not a great finisher. He's not a good playmaker. He's not a good rebounder. He's not a good defender. He's not a good turnover generator. So it's just like, it's a ton of boxes that you can check that were negative, and his shot just wasn't good enough last year. If you're looking at Jose Alvarado off the bench, and Jose has done nothing but win his minutes ever since he's come to the Pelicans. If you're looking at potentially CJ McCollum off the bench, then there's no way that you can get Hawkins on the court. Because now they got Javonte Green as well, and that guy
by the way,
that guy's going to earn minutes.
Yeah,
he's going to find his way into minutes. He absolutely is.
Talk about someone who will guard up. That is just like Javonte Green. Love Javonte. That was a good pickup by them. If he's able to stay healthy, yeah, I think he'll get minutes. Are you ready to enter the lightning round cookie cutter portion of these podcasts?
Let's do it.
Is there something good, bad, strength, weakness, storyline development, whatever, that's flying under the radar that you think needs to be discussed more?
Flying under the radar. Yes. I would say it's how Willie Green's going to handle the season. So last year, they brought on James Borrego to facilitate with the offensive execution and the offensive schemes. And about partway early on in the season, they abandoned a lot of those principles and philosophies. Now, there's a couple different reasons why that may or may not have happened, but the important thing here is they went away from it. It's imperative that the Pelicans not go away from that style of play this coming year. And in fact, they need to lean into it more, as we've kind of talked about all throughout the podcast, because of their roster limitations. Willie Green is going to have to be a coach that responds very quickly to the data in front of him. So you can't make it to the whole year and play the starting lineup that's negative. You can't play Garrett Temple for 1,000 minutes for no good reason. You can't do all of these things that are very clearly just not good for your team and just continue to do them well past the expiration date. So I think how Willie Green approaches this season and the creativity that he embraces is going to define how good these Pelicans can be, because if they're going to be put in a box or be pretty limited, and it's going to be, okay, well, Trey's just going to hide in the corner, and then it's going to be Brandon to take turn to ISO for a midi, and then Dejounte take turn to ISO for a midi, and then Zion go ISO. It's not going to be a fun season for anybody. So that is what I think is kind of flying under the radar. Is it's not a contract year for Willie Green, but I think it's heading into one. And I don't want to say he's coaching for his job, but that seat can get really, really warm if things don't go right.
I will say, and I do think a lot of this is just the level of maybe stability in a lot of these positions around the NBA. He feels like he might have the hottest coaching seat right now, just because, like, okay, the Bulls and Blazers, fine, but there's just no expectations for those teams. So if you want to say Chauncey Billups or Billy Donovan, sure. But I kind of look at Willie Green right now just because the Pelicans on paper are really good. They might not be perfect, so there's going to be that expectations there. So there's a chance that he's like in the most pressure-filled situation relative to the rest of the head coaches in the league.
Yeah, like if you go another year where you can't get Brandon to take threes and you continue to play these like offensive zero guys way more than you need to, and then you have all this offensive talent and you end up being a not top 10 offensive team, then I think it's fair to ask, like, should the Pelicans head in a different direction?
So at full strength, what does the top 10 rotation for this team look like? I have, I think, 8 locks penciled in, where it was Dejounte Murray, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, Trey Murphy, Zion, CJ, Jose Alvarado, and then I have Tice as a lock just because I figure one of the bigs is going to play.
I would say Tice would be 8. Javonte Green would be 9. And that 10th spot will rotate between, depending on the matchup, Jordan Hawkins, JRE, and Misi/Carlo. So just kind of what they need on any given night.
What is going to be this team's most used closing lineup?
It better be Dejounte Murray, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson. I don't know if that will be the most used one. And some of that might be out of their control because a lot of these guys just get hurt. So
it always, with the Pelicans, it always ends up resolving itself in the form of people not being available when we think they have a log jam.
Right.
Is there a weird, funky, offbeat lineup that you're hoping Willie Green rolls out this year?
I feel like the answer to that one is like just the starting lineup, that's closing lineup that I just pitched. But just in the spirit of being small and weird, it would be kind of fun for them to do. It would be fun for them to do Zion and as many shooters on the court as possible. So let's get CJ out there. Let's get Trey out there. Let's get Jordan Hawkins out there. And that fourth guy, if Matt Ryan's still out there on the team, it'd be hilarious to get Matt Ryan out there. Or, if he's not, then you're kind of picking between like what serves you best. And I kind of like Dejounte there. And I kind of like Herb there too, just seeing what you can do. But it'd be fun to do a weird Zion plus just elite shooting at every level. And it's just like movement and quick decisions.
I want to see one where it's like your front court is just Herb, Trey Murphy, and Javonte Green. And like, if you just want more size out there, like Ingram can be a part of that and we'll pay Dejounte. I have no idea what that looks like, but like Javonte Green has been like made a career of guarding like actual bigs a lot of the time. So
well Zion and the Dogs lineup historically has worked, and it's gone back to like the Stan Van Gundy years. So like that would be Jose, Javonte, Herb, Trey, and Zion. Like that would be like Zion and the Dogs, in my opinion. Like that would be like two just absolutely go get them guys in Jose and Javonte, and then Herb, of course, just being the menace that he is. And
I want to see them go to that, but like also during when Zion's on the bench, like forget about putting out an actual big. Like let's just like I don't know who that I would pay to see that.
Yeah, just put the Dogs out there.
So we have, as we record this, their over under is currently set at 45.5. Would you take the over or the under on that?
I would take the under at this rate. 45.5 is a tough ask in the West when you have the worst center rotation in the league. That's what I would say. And just kind of like these weird fit questions just hanging over you. Like, hey, what is this team going to look like? But yeah, I don't think it's a major under. I think this team should win more than they lose. So it should be like a 43-44 win team barring changes.
What's also tough with them too is that let's say they make changes that we're in support of and that rebalances the roster, in theory makes them better. If this happens in the middle of the year, it's just harder to make these integrations, where that's the value of doing it over the offseason is you have to go through a training camp with everybody.
Right.
So how does that impact them if they do wind up moving Ingram or CJ or trying to integrate this semi-big new piece midstream? I just don't know how they'll necessarily respond to that.
It's a great question. Who knows, man? I just hope it would be an easy one. I mean, the Mavs are able to do it very quickly with Gafford and PJ, right? So it's like if the guys make sense as a fit, and sometimes it just takes off. Because in my opinion, you would be sending out a guy that is a little bit of an awkward fit. So if you're doing that and simplifying people's roles, like, okay, yeah, Dejounte is the clear-cut point guard, Zion's the Zion, and then everyone else kind of fill in around that, then maybe it wouldn't take that long to integrate.
Do you have this is such a weird question because I feel like this roster is going to look different in February, but do you have a floor for them in the West, or is it are there any playoff teams that you consider them, you look at and say, okay, they'll definitely be better than this potential playoff team in the West?
I think it's risky business to set floors in the West, because what if Wemby is just incredible and Chris Paul has a renaissance year down in San Antonio, right? What if the Rockets take off? What if, so it's I would like to say, yeah, the floor is they're going to be better than Portland and Utah. I think that's very reasonable to say. And I think like they would absolutely be better than Houston and San Antonio. But it's just like, okay, one of your guys misses time for an extended period, and one of the other teams has an unexpected leap. You can find yourself at the third worst team in the West. So I would say if you put them in tiers, they would be in a similar tier right now as the Kings, the Lakers, the Clippers, and I would say the Warriors. I would put them all in the same tier.
I will say, and this is kind of what's fun about the West, is that you could probably pitch me on like any order and I'm not going to push back. And like, if you honestly, if you told me the Pelicans finished 11th, I'd be like, okay. But if you told me the Pelicans finished like 1 or 2, I'd be like, yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah.
Like if everyone was just healthy, you could pitch me like there's some of that in the East, but only with like 4 or 5 teams. And in the West, it's like 10 or 11, which is just bonkers.
Yeah, I would say they're in that tier. And then like, like the teams I mentioned, like Utah and Houston and San Antonio are the tier below. And then Portland's like the clear cut, like last one.
Do you think like Will Hardy's going to get fired for conduct not detrimental enough to the team if Utah rattles off another like, December to remember or whatever it is?
Well, like the long time like league rumor is that he's Pop's heir. So like Will Hardy coaching Wemby, I don't know, man. Like I'm sure Hardy's going to be fine wherever he goes. That guy's an incredible coach.
Is there anything about the Pelicans, this team, the coming season I haven't talked to you about, we haven't discussed, that you think we should touch upon before I let you go?
I think we covered pretty much I think we hit all the important notes that we needed to cover for sure.
So as soon as we're done, that's when the Brandon Ingram news breaks that the trade is coming, because that's how these things typically work. Are you just able to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you're putting out?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Fear the Brown, as you see on your screen right there. But you can also find me at intheknow.substack.com. That's where I do my writing. We'll publish our podcast there, and we have a YouTube channel with the same name called In the Know.
The links to both of those will be found in the podcast and our YouTube description. Shamit, thank you so much for all your time, as you give me every year. And as you know by now, I will be pestering you again down the line.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, Dan.